Welcome back. Today we are going to take a look at TINHIFI's T2 DLC. And before we begin, I want to thank Linsol for sending me the review sample. If you look today on their webpage, it is $59, which is actually a great price for this set, and we'll kind of get into that in a bit. So T2 DLC, of course, they would call it their upgraded version of the classic T2 set, almost a legendary neutral set at this point in time. And T2 sort of continues with the dual 10mm diamond-like carbon dynamic driver, 10 millimeters. The rest of it, kind of 8-core cable, aluminum, great fit. I think all that is carried over from the T2 as well. I think what is new are these 2-pin connectors as opposed to the MMCX. But the rest of it, the shells, like they say, they're actually aluminum, very lightweight, very comfortable. Someone actually asked me if this was a sticker on the back. I think it actually is a sticker, maybe an edge-to-edge sticker. There's almost no, doesn't feel embossed. It doesn't feel raised at all. It's kind of a very smooth surface, like that is a sticker, but cannot confirm or deny what that actually is, as I do not know. But yeah, the rest of it, I think you do have to be a little aware of your tips on this one. There is a vent that we can almost see right. It's kind of right here. So there's a vent right at the. Oh, it's actually right there. So it's right at the base of the nozzle. And if you're not too careful, your tip will actually hit that vent and you'll be treated to a little extra base. So do be aware if you're throwing tips on it that happen to be a little longer or extend down a little bit further. If you block the vent, that will give you a little base bump. Tips, I think they did a pretty good job. They actually have a set of silicone tips, which I don't have here, but they also include the blue TINHIFI foam set, which is actually pretty nice as well. So that is kind of a close-up, $59, like I said. And as we kind of jump into it, so a couple pros and cons. As I said, I think this one is actually priced really right. I think they came in a little under some of their competitors, and I think that was a brilliant move. Just a few dollars, here and there makes a big difference. And when you deliver a great sound, great tuning, and I think it is quite competitive with the other group at the same price, or even the ones that are a little more expensive. I think they actually nailed this whole bit right here. A great set, great tuning, very competitive with the other sets that we'll get into in a minute. And they actually delivered something that is quite a bit of fun. And I think that's always a problem with more neutral sets. I think people tend to call them a little unengaging, a little less fun. And this one, they changed the tuning a little bit. So I would actually call this one quite a bit of fun. On the con side, is it neutral like T2? It is not. And we'll take a super quick look at this. So if you're looking at it against T2, and this is a set of T2, which I don't have, but Super Review had. So this is Super Review's T2 set. You can kind of see the base was probably a little bit less than neutral, and it had this really neutral-ish low pin gain compensation, and then it raised for some upper treble. That was sort of a characteristic of T2. T2 DLC definitely has more bass elevation, quite a bit of a bass boost right here. That is a lot of your fun, and they raised this. This is boosted quite a bit. This whole mid-range is actually quite a bit over the original T2, and that's why I said they didn't quite nail the same signature. T2 DLC is definitely something a little different, but those of you who are looking for that neutral T2, not exactly there on T2 DLC. And it's also a great set among great sets, and I think this is going to be one of the bigger cons of this set is when we look at a new set like Heart Mirror Pro, and I'll thank Ian Fan for his Heart Mirror Pro graph. T2 DLC is actually in the red, and the legendary Moondrop Aria is actually in the blue. And you can kind of see, from bass through into the mid-range, not all that much difference. And T2 actually took this a slightly less bass shelf, which I have no problem with. But when you get right into the mid-range and where kind of the meat of where the balance is on this set, you can kind of see that T2 took this upper path and it's almost right at 10 dB. Heart Mirror Pro is probably a decibel or two right below it, and then Aria is a couple dBs below that as well. And the rest of it, these are all kind of similar, and which ones have air, all that's a little different too. But, it's a really tough group of sets. And as I said, I think they hit the price right. It's probably a little cheaper than both of the other sets, and it delivers a signature that's going to be a little bit similar, and technicalities is going to be similar as well. So, like I said, they sort of hit the spot on, hitting the right bits here, but it's still going to be hard to stand out among other great sets, even though it is a great set. It's sitting right there in the ballpark with other great sets. And I do think they pushed it to the edge of fatigue a bit, and I just kind of browsed over that. But this bit right here, this upper mid-range right at 10 dB, that is going to push some ears right to the edge of fatigue. And I'll say it's right there to the edge. It didn't quite go over. Depending on your tips, depending on your source, maybe it'll push you over. But do be aware that this one, of the group is probably going to be the one that that pinna gain area is probably going to maybe push you to the edge of fatigue after a long listen to it. So to counter that, I do say bring out the memes, and whether that is burn in, if you're a 200-hour burn in guy, this one will mellow out after some burn in, and that upper mid range will come down a little bit. It's super energetic, and I think however people like to bring the energy down on these bits, whether that's 200 hours of burn in. I was not a huge fan of this cable at all. Yeah, that's all I will say on it. Is I was not a fan of this cable. If you have any other cables and you are into cable swapping, I would certainly advise changing that cable. Definitely tips. You are going to have to find tips that don't emphasize this bit. You want to bring it down almost a decibel or two, in sound to where the other two are. I think that actually works out a little better. I don't mind that they set it where it is, but you want tips that aren't going to make that sound a little more elevated than it actually is. Same on the source. So whatever your meme thing is, however you like to get sets dialed in, definitely work on that. So sound, it has this kind of clean, clear, transparent, speedy, great separation is sort of the one thing that I kind of kept on going back to. Really, really great separation. Just lowering the bass just a little bit, a little more extra on that pinna gain area. The whole thing has great separation, and it feels very dynamic. And I said more dynamic than bright because it doesn't really come across as super bright, but it comes across as dynamic. And even though in my brain and my gut it's a little bright, I still say that it feels a little more dynamic than bright. But yeah, it's definitely not dark. It's definitely a little over the fence on the bright side, and it's kind of a shallow V as well. So the bass, again, I think they actually nailed. And whether you say they were very thoughtful in balance here, balancing out their bass shelf with the upper mids, or you say they sort of took a bass shelf that was very popular and works quite well in the market today and kind of adjusted this. I think they really did put some thought into how this exact bass level, even this slight roll off into the sub bass, how it keeps everything very, very clean and fast. And then it gets, great separation and dynamics from here. I think the whole thing, someone really thought about how that all works. And the bass is actually a really big part of that. So it's a really nice balance of quality and quantity. It's a really nice driver, and there's really nice quality there. The quantity, it's not a bass head set, but it's always there supporting the mids. And like I said, it's just a very thoughtful balance with that whole mid range. And again, the quantity is really right about where it should be to portray, so you could hear nice detail and texture. And for the price, it's just really nice tuning for this dynamic driver, and two dynamic drivers quite well. Definitely with a better source, it actually tightens up with more power. I definitely highly suggest something with a more powerful source. And this one definitely goes deep enough. Like I said, there's a slight roll off. I don't really mind this one at all. I think it goes deep enough, but not deep enough to really sound too thick for the mids. Again, this is another set where they really kept this fast and light, more dynamic sound. They didn't want a whole lot of bass muddying up the sound. So it doesn't go super, super deep. It'll definitely rumble, but you're not really going to have those thick mids that really take away from some of the speed that this one has. It definitely has really good slam for a non-bass focus set. Again, the driver hits pretty hard. It's got a very tight definition to it. Nice shape, nice definition, and it comes across in slam. This isn't kind of a loosey bass sound. This one is especially with a better source, very tight, hits kind of hard, a lot harder than I thought it was going to do. So, new track, check Shape of Your Heart from Joda. I think, for popular music, for even this is kind of synthwave music, I think the bass hits quite hard. It hits deep enough. I think for popular music, this one was probably a really nice balance of those two, quality and quantity, as I said. So the mids, like I talked about, it's got this clean, clear, sharp, just warm enough. These words are going to ring kind of similar to what I talked about. Snow Aria, probably Aria, Titan S, Heart Mirror Pro, I bet is going to be in the same ballpark. Again, lots of great sets pulling off this clean, clear, transparent, just warm enough, great vocals. Instruments are definitely better on this one, just in my personal opinion. And they really pushed the upper mids to the edge of balance. And again, this, like we talked about, this whole upper mid section between 8 and 10 dB sort of is that Goldilocks zone, and they push it to the top of it. So do be aware of that one. So I think the lower mids, especially those male vocals, they lack a hair of depth. So I think the bass itself, when you're hearing bass and tracks, goes deep enough. On male vocals, I couldn't quite convince myself that they were kind of dead on. I think they just stop a little bit short. If you're one who likes, especially older male, like even some of the old funk groove male vocals, Earth, Wind, and Fire, some of those deeper voices, I think stopped a little short. And with an upper mid-range, the way it's pushed the way it is, that's not all that shocking. So I'll just call it as kind of a nitpick for me, kind of a personal craziness on that bit. Females are definitely better. They're definitely riding that curve. They're more energetic, very dynamic, lively, tons of separation, tons of clarity and dynamics in the upper mids. I mean, all that comes through in those female vocals really quite well. So the vocals are good, and like I said, I couldn't quite get past my nitpick on the male vocals, but instruments are really come to life on this tuning, and that's, you can kind of tell they tune more for instruments and jazz than they did for vocals. It just kind of comes through. This is just one of those great examples of opening up your mids. They lower the bass a little bit to keep everything super clean, super transparent, and then you let the driver do its thing, and that's exactly really what they did on this set. The two drivers working together, they deliver that detail and resolution and everything that you're expecting at this price point in a single dynamic driver. Very, very good. So yeah, for the price and for two dynamic drivers, it's really hard to fault it. Go Penguins, The Raven, it's just a fun track on this set because the bass level is actually boosted a little bit, but it still pulls off detail and decay and texture and complexity without even going too bright or having a sloppy bass. There's just some magic tuning that they actually did quite well here that just works on even complex parts on a dynamic driver, keeping everything slightly less bassy, fast, tight. All these things really kind of work on a track like The Raven and other tracks that have some complexity to it with a few instruments, and you could just tell that's exactly the zone that those guys were in. So the treble, like I said, the upper mid elevation, upper mid range, it's definitely boosted quite a bit. It's got an emphasis, but after that, it actually goes quite relaxed but airy. And I think they actually pulled that off quite well. You really need to dial in those memes, like I said, to the point where the upper mid is less of a focus. If you have these tips that really focus on an upper mid, some of the upper treble is going to get a bit lost. So that was one of my focuses in picking tips, was to just push that just a little bit back into the background, not as focused on the upper mid, so you can really hear all of T2 DLC. And definitely one of the better versions of high upper mids, sloping down a little bit and then pop up for treble air. And depending on your tips, so we're kind of talking about this, so popping up pretty high, 10 dB, upper mid range, kind of sloping down into the rest of your treble, and then they do pop, and a lot of your tips are going to adjust this, especially that high treble put. I think this was actually the stock tip, and I think that was the highest. And the stock tip pushed this a little bit too high and pushed this a little bit too high. So that was one of my points to adjust, was this and that. And once you get these two dialed in for your ears, yeah, they actually pulled off that whole treble bit quite well. So cymbals on take five, Dave Brubeck's take five, not overly energetic, not as energetic as you would think they're going to be compared to what the upper mid bit sounds like. There's tons of energy, but when you just move away a little bit from that and you listen to the cymbals, not really as energetic as other sets. But then you get to something a little higher in the synths on Joda's Fall Away, that 2 minutes, just 1/82 part, much more energetic, much more engaging, kind of takes on that shallow V style engagement. Those of you who are attracted to the V shapes will kind of feel at home with that. Definitely even more fun at higher volumes. And like I said, it pushed to the edge of fatigue, and it never really crossed the line for me, especially after you get the right tips for it. So this one, definitely on paper, I would say it wasn't going to be a higher volume set, but it actually does work quite well for me at higher volumes. So stage, definitely not the biggest, underpowered. This is another one, like I said, the bass itself tightens up, the stage comes a little bigger, and I think it just works a lot better for a better source. And this one, so stage-wise, it definitely opens up with a better source. Dial it in so it sounds more balanced. If you, again, sets that have too much of a focus on the upper mid tend to flatten out, not be as deep. And this one is no different. You just got to have the right balance and everything opens up and you get better imaging and separation and layering. All those things fall into place, but you definitely need to dial this one in quite a bit. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.